So that's kind of personal breakdowns or relational problems or kind of business problems. The particular disputes the Corinthians might have been taken to court would have been maybe if kind of one Christian had done some plumbing work for another and there was a disagreement over the standard of work, and so they had a dispute. Or it might be that one accused another of being dishonest with someone in their family, and so there's a kind of relational dispute there. They're what we would call civil disputes. They're not criminal cases. And I think if they were criminal cases, Paul's response would be very different. He would say, take it to the authorities. Because in other letters that Paul writes, particularly Romans chapter 13, we see Paul take a very positive stance towards secular governments. He even says that God has instituted these things to restrict evil and to punish wrongdoing. And so I just want to be very, very clear. Do not take this passage or anything I say this morning as kind of a reason for, if you are a victim of abuse or violence in the church, or if you know people who are, do not think, we just got to cover that up. I shouldn't take a Christian to court. No. God has instituted authorities for us to do this. And Paul is here not speaking about criminal cases, but he's speaking about relational breakdowns. He's saying, don't take those before courts. But of course, my answer to that question still raises another question, which is, how relevant is this passage to us then? How much can we apply this sort of passage about law courts and public disputes to our world today? Because I don't know about you, but I've been in the church for most of my life. I've had a few relational problems. It's never crossed my mind to take someone to court over those matters. And I imagine many of us wouldn't have ever had to kind of face that question either. It's very different for the Corinthians, we have to understand. For them, in their Greco-Roman world, in a Roman colony like Corinth, it would have been very easy to take your neighbor to court over anything. As a Roman city, it would have had public courts right in the center of town, and these weren't kind of buildings that had restricted access. They were open-air buildings. They were like theaters, and people genuinely treated them like theaters. They were kind of part of the entertainment of the city to kind of see neighbors go at it with one another. And so it wouldn't have been uncommon at all if I was living next door to Ben and he damaged the fence for me to kind of drag him to court and ruin him in front of his friends and family. That would be very common in their world. But of course, it's not common in ours. Me and Ben have never had that sort of battle. And I guess many of us, we may never in our lifetime set foot in a courtroom, particularly not as a kind of defendant or accuser. I say many because I do know that some of us in our church have actually had to face this question. I know even some quite recently in our church have had to face pressure from authorities to take other believers to court. And I just want to say I've been so humbled at their response to that pressure and how they obeyed a very direct command here, and even at a potential cost to themselves. So I'm not saying that this passage, never has a direct application for us. But I guess the question I'm kind of waffling myself towards is this a passage that we can just kind of put away for a rainy day? Is it a passage that we can kind of just bring up when we kind of have this kind of public dispute question and we thought, shall I take this person to court? Or is it one that has wider application? And my answer to that question is yes. I think this passage actually has some immense wisdom for all of us in how we deal with just day-to-day relationships and relational breakdown. And I want to explain why that is before we jump to the passage. And that's because I think what the Corinthians are doing with their relational problems is actually not so different from what you and I will often be tempted to do with our relational problems. See, what these Corinthians were doing is they were, as we say, having disputes with each other, a falling out over something. But instead of taking it to the person that hurt them, as Jesus tells us to do in Matthew 18, And instead of, even if that fails, involving church family to help with the resolution, instead of going through those steps, what the Corinthians are doing is they're going straight to the public stage, straight to the media of their day. They're going straight to the public courts to kind of air it all in front of everyone. And I actually want to suggest to us that is not a million miles away from what we in our culture can be tempted to do with our relational problems. I think a very blatant example of this would be when we take our relational breakdowns to social media. You ever think that we can sometimes treat social media as actually something like a public court? We might write anonymously on there, but we'll kind of write a post about how someone's hurt us. And what we're asking for, we're essentially asking for people to comment to condemn that person as guilty. We're using social media as a jury to say, acquit me of any wrongdoing and punish this person. That's a very blatant way that we can kind of fall into the same trap as the Corinthians. But I know what many of us are thinking at this point. I've never done that. And if you know me and are friends with me on Facebook, you'll be very disappointed because I think the last time I posted on social media was about 2017. That was the last time something interesting happened in my life. And so, can I acquit myself of this? I did actually have a child. I didn't think about that. But safety reasons and all that. But does that mean if you are not a social media fiend that you can acquit yourself? Well, I think actually something we can all fall into is kind of treating our friendship groups as like a public court for our problems in the church. You ever kind of express something to your friends and kind of just laid out all these ways that this person has hurt you? And I think sometimes that can have a healthy element because it's sometimes helpful to get counsel from friends before you go to someone to kind of deal with this problem and find a resolution. But I know in my heart, often when I share those problems with friends, it's not so much to get counsel, but it's to get verdicts. It's to hear them say, oh, that person is guilty. Simon, you've done nothing. You are completely innocent, and that person has hurt you in so many ways. It looks different to how the Corinthians do it. We don't have public courts. We're not as blatant as that all the time. But we can fall into the same things, and the result is still the same. On a church, when these relational problems get dealt with in these unhealthy ways, the result is always fracturing of the church, and it brings the gospel into disrepute as others look at it. And even thinking of those kind of words that Jake and Eliz brought, as a church, we're called to be people that have a river of life going out from us. But when our relationships break down, it's like that river gets dammed, and that life can't go out because we're kind of clogging it up with all our issues. And I want to be clear again, I don't believe that as Ascot Life Church we are here just yet. I don't think we're quite as bad as the Corinthians, but the thing is, we can always drift that way. The Corinthians got into this mess 4 years after Paul was with them. The same can happen to us. And so I think it'll be really helpful for us as we turn to the passage now to hear how Paul instructs them to deal with relational problems when they come. And though Paul is quite direct in this passage, I actually believe this will be a really encouraging passage for us to look at, because though Paul is exasperated, he doesn't just kind of chastise them for going to the courts. He kind of addresses this problem by telling them who they are, by telling them who God's grace has made them to be and how this new identity can transform their relationships. And so what we're going to do this morning is now, for this kind of second half, we're just going to look at the passage and we're going to see 3 things Paul wants you to know about who you are if you know Jesus and how this will transform everything. And these things are this. Firstly, Paul wants us to know that we are future judges of the world, and therefore we have the ability to handle problems. Secondly, he wants us to know that we are brothers and sisters, and therefore we have great motivation to handle problems. And thirdly, he wants us to know that we're people of the cross, and therefore we have the humility able to deal with problems when they come. But let's firstly just tackle this first one, which is surely the most juicy. That Paul says we are future judges of the whole world. You see that in verses 2 and 3. He says, "Don't you know that the saints will judge the world?" And then he says, just the next line in verse 3, he says, "Don't you know that we will judge angels?" And I've always found these verses confusing because my response is really, no, Paul, I didn't know that. Tell me where you're getting that from the Bible. And the thing is, if you look through the whole Old Testament and even much of the New Testament, you actually won't find much at all about this subject. That Christians will be judges of the world. Much more that Christians will be judges of angels. There's a few hints in certain places, but there's nothing really concrete. And frustratingly, Paul just kind of moves on as if we all know that. But what's helped me as I've studied this passage and prepared to teach it is to see that actually Paul is drawing on a theme that is very common in the Bible. And that's that God's people have a call to reign over the world with him. It's a very quick Bible overview. Starts in the beginning of the Bible. And what we see is that God created humanity to be co-rulers with him. He made Adam and Eve, placed them in a garden, gave them a command to subdue and have dominion over the earth, to allow it to flourish. They were planted as a king and queen. And yet, tragically, through listening to part of the creation, a snake, and through rebelling against God, they kind of abdicated from their position as rulers. And that's why we see humanity and the whole world in such a mess. It has no caretakers. And so through the whole Old Testament from then on, we're waiting for this perfect human to arrive. One who loves God with all their heart and one who can have dominion over creation. And then we turn into the New Testament and our wait's finally over. We meet Jesus, who not only loves his Father God with all his heart, but he even demonstrates kind of dominion over the world. He can kind of still sees, and he can heal sick people, and he can certainly heal relational problems. And then the most amazing thing is that we see that Jesus, he actually gives his life for us so that we can receive new life, so that we can be remade as humans and even have a hope of one day ruling with him. As Christians, we believe that one day Jesus will return, make this whole world new, and we will reign with him. That is a theme throughout the Bible. And so I think that makes what Paul's saying here actually not that much of a jump. Because if we are going to be rulers with Christ, part of ruling well means dispensing justice, doesn't it? It means making sure that the world, the new heavens and earth, is a place of justice and peace as God wants it to be. And that will even, Paul says, result in ruling over angels, making sure that they are in line. And I'm sure that we still have kind of many questions about what being a judge looks like in the new world. But I think the point Paul is making from it is clear at least, which is that if you and I, because we know Jesus, have this great calling to be judges of the world, it is then ridiculous if we aren't able to kind of handle what Paul calls kind of trivial matters of this life. Paul is kind of calling the Corinthians here and saying, don't kind of abdicate your identity. Don't do what Adam and Eve did and abdicated your responsibility to rule just because it's difficult to deal with relational problems. Don't just let others do it because it's hard. And I do think this is something we really should take hold of as a church. Because I know for myself that at times when I am maybe more reluctant to resolve relational problems, maybe it's someone who's hurt me, or maybe someone I've hurt, or maybe it's even two people I know who are kind of not in good relationship and, restoring them. The thing that stops me more than anything is if it's really hard to resolve relationships. You have to book time in to go and meet with the person because, it's good to do it face to face. You have to consider how you're going to kind of present what's on your heart. You're going to have to do a lot of listening because, of course, things are always two-way. It's going to involve speaking with wisdom and then kind of going through that cycle again and again of listening, speaking, speaking. It's hugely emotionally taxing on your time as well. And so I often just kind of go the easier route, of just kind of leaving it, or even just kind of using my friends as that court, as we talked about earlier. But though it's hard, Paul says, Simon, you've got to remember your identity. You've got to remember that Jesus has called you to reign with him. He's called you to be a judge over much bigger matters than these. And so when they come, kind of just use them as practice. Engaging them in them, knowing that you are a future judge, and so you have the resources to deal with this. Paul says, if you are judges, act as who you are. Act as who you are going to be. And I guess for some of us, that means a response to this message might be, maybe after many weeks, kind of actually approaching someone who's hurt you, and then opening up a conversation about talking about it. Or maybe it's if you know people, maybe in your life group or in your friendship group or just in the church who are not in good relationship. Maybe it's taking that really hard first step and speaking to one of them and saying, hey, I think we should repair this. It's difficult, but Paul says, remember who you are. Your future judges, able to bring justice. So that's the first thing Paul wants us to see, but there's also two more I want to look at briefly. And the second is that Paul wants us to know that as believers, we are not just future judges, but we are also brothers and sisters of one another. I think Paul wants us to know this because he actually repeats brother and sister language a lot in this passage. Actually, he repeats it so much that our English translations of the Bible don't always translate it brother or sister, because otherwise Paul would sound too repetitive. Rest assured, I'm not going to kind of subject you to an amateur Greek translation of this passage from me, but I do think you can kind of see Paul's amplification of this theme, even in our passage that we have it here translated. For instance, look at verse 6. Paul says, brother goes to court against brother, and that before unbelievers. Or he says even more in verse 8, he says, you yourselves, you do wrong and you cheat, and you do this, he says, to brothers and sisters. Paul wants them to know that they are brothers and sisters. And of course, for the Corinthian Christians, that wouldn't have been new information. Wouldn't have been a shock for them to find out that as Christians, we're siblings. It's probably not a shock for many of us in the room either, because it's a common way that Christians talk about one another. Because we have one father and one elder brother in Jesus, we are all family together. But I think what Paul is doing here, by using this language so much, is that he's trying to get us to see what it means to be brothers and sisters. Particularly what it means for when relationships go wrong. Because I think it means two things. Firstly, that relationships will go wrong if we're brothers and sisters. Paul wants us to know that as brothers and sisters, we shouldn't be surprised when there are problems in the church. Because we're family. And family's fine. Families spend a lot of time together, and when you spend time with people, things break down. It's okay when there are problems. Don't hear me as saying we should always have perfect relationships all the time. But the second thing Paul wants us to know is that as brothers and sisters, it means that when things break down, it should be our utmost priority to fix it as soon as possible. Because we're family. The people in this room, they're not just our colleagues who, we can just have a business relationship with from 9 to 5 and then clock out and go back home. They're not just even friends who, if things don't work out, we can go into another friendship group. No, they are our family. And family's permanent. We'll always be family. In fact, spiritual family, even more permanent than flesh and blood family. We're going to be family till we die and afterwards as well. And so Paul says, get used to that. Treat each other as that. When you have problems, deal with them straight away. It's like he's saying, before you take your brother or sister to court over that matter, or before you write about them on social media, or before you kind of unload their dirty laundry in front of your friends, he says, remember who they are. Remember who you are to them. That they're a brother or sister for whom Christ died. That's the second thing Paul wants us to know. about our relationships is that we are brothers and sisters, and so when relationships break down, which they will, we should have the strongest motivation to fix them. But just lastly, before we finish, I just want to look at the third ultimate thing really that Paul wants us to know as believers, which is that we are people of the cross. We're people of the cross. Verse 7, Paul says this: "As it is, to have legal disputes against one another is already a defeat for you." And Paul's, of course, using a bit of sarcasm here, as if to say, you're going to court because you think you're going to win the battle. Well, let me tell you, as soon as you step foot in that building, you've lost. Everything has been lost that moment. And then he says a very shocking thing. He says, why not? Here's another idea. Why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be cheated? Why not rather be the one that has to absorb the brokenness of this relationship? It's shocking, isn't it? Paul is saying it is better for you to take on the hurt or wrong or cheating or pain of the broken relationship rather than to get equal with someone and make sure you come out on top. And just in case we think this is Paul kind of going a bit extreme and kind of getting himself hyped up, I think he's drawing this straight from the words of Jesus here, who said in Matthew 5, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." That's the get equal mindset. But Jesus says, "I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. And as for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well." And Paul just says the same thing in different language. He says, why not be the one who's wronged? Why not resolve this relationship by absorbing the pain, forgiving them, and letting yourself be cheated? And I'm sure we can all imagine that, if we were all to practice this ethic of Jesus, of kind of, an eye, not an eye for an eye, but kind of, whatever they do to us, so you can have even more. If everyone were to practice this, we would surely live in a relational utopia. But the problem with these passages is not the clarity of what Jesus and Paul is saying, but it's how do we have the humility to do that? How on earth could we be so free with our image, free with our honor, free with even our possessions, to enable us to follow this extreme way of life? And the answer, of course, at the back of Paul's mind in this whole passage is the cross. Because what do we see at the cross? At the cross, we see that the one that we have wronged and cheated, the one that we have rebelled against, the one that we have hurled abuse at, the one that we have taken everything away from, we see that God chose to restore that relationship not by bringing our sins against us, not by taking us to court and hurling all this right back at us, but instead God chose to restore the relationship by entering into our place, by becoming a human, and more than that, by taking on his own shoulders all of our sin. He fixed the problem by being wronged and cheated even further. And Paul says, guys, it's that message that brought you to God. It's that message that has enabled you to see God's love and forgiveness. It's his mercy that has led you to repentance. And so he says, why not practice the same thing when relationships break down in the church? Why not kind of take on the path of the cross? And the cross enables you to do that. Through the cross, we see that God loved us so much that he would give his son to die for us. If that's your identity, one loved by God, then what does it matter if someone insults you a little bit? At the cross, we see that Jesus gave not just things for us, but he gave his whole life so that we could be made rich. If that's your identity, as one rich and with a great inheritance, why does it matter if you are cheated out of a few things? This is Paul's ultimate reason for why we can have hope for relationships in the church, for that dam to be unplugged and for the river to flow out. Why can we hope for good relationships here? It's because we're people of the cross. We're people who know how to forgive because we have been forgiven. And so Paul says, remember that you're judges so that you can arbitrate disputes. Remember that you're brothers and sisters and so you have the motivation. But he says ultimately, remember you're people of the cross. So that when relationship and resolutions involve humility, you have a resource for that. And it's what God has done for you. And so that's where we're going to finish this morning. I'm going to invite the band back up and we're going to remember our servant king who gave his life for us. And I'm aware that for some of us there may need to be very concrete applications of this passage for us. Maybe you do need to take a step towards restoring a relationship or text someone during worship. Say, can we meet up? Or maybe you need to make plans for how to restore some friendships that you know have broken down. But we're going to sing straight away about the cross together because our motivation must come from there. We must remember we are people of the cross who have been forgiven much and so can forgive much. And so can I just invite us to stand, and I'm going to pray for us now as we head into worship together.